just heard Colin Van Oosteren explain why he believes he's the best choice to replace Governor Hassan in the corner office. But Mark Connolly just might have something to say about that. He's been busy making his case this year as well. He's my next guest this morning. Sir, good to see you.
Good to see you, Josh.
A little over 2 weeks away from the primary. That's hard to believe. How are things going? How do you feel things are?
I think things are going great. We have a good field organization, good staff. We have good endorsements, like professional firefighters, 4 state senators. Our message is going out about a safer and stronger New Hampshire, and it's resonating, and we feel really good about our chances to win September 13th.
When it comes to the issues, what do you think the defining ones will be for the candidates for governor on the Democratic side in particular?
First of all, I think it's, the first thing a governor does is keep New Hampshire safe, their state safe, and we have an opioid crisis we're addressing, the governor, and we have to continue that leadership. We have Planned Parenthood funding, healthcare funding, in terms of school funding and education. We're going to do that in our formula to get monies to the school systems. Energy, transportation, all these issues are part of what we're talking about in this cycle. But what I really say is we need to step it up as a state to meet the challenge of the 21st century economy.
Let's talk about the opioid crisis. Has your approach to it changed at all since you became a candidate and you learned more about it? What would you do differently than what we're seeing so far?
Sure. I mean, you always learn things. I've met with a lot of, firefighters, police chiefs and officers and people in the communities and ask what they think we should do. And the things I'm learning is it really gets down to prevention, treatment, and recovery. And we have to do a better job of getting the monies into recovery. And so I put out a plan to talk about how we should break down the silos of state government, municipal government, and we should have a coordinated effort between the Office of Emergency Management, the drug czar, and try weekly meetings and really identify how we should approach this really tough crisis before our state. We're doing a good job. I think we need to step it up also on what we can do. We're learning about this. We have needle exchanges, medication treatment, peer-to-peer counseling. All those things are part of it. It's not one thing. It's a whole bunch of things we need to do.
One thing interesting to get your take on this is talk about the interagency communication. I mean, you're a former securities chief, and we know that there was a lack of communication with some of the agencies involved there. We're not going to get into that. But how much of a priority would it be to make sure, whether it be technology or face-to-face meetings, that people knew what the other people are doing to make sure that there's no redundant, efforts?
You're right on. I mean, listen, from my experience in the private sector and the public sector, communication is what it's all about. You have to meet frequently. That's why I said that we really should encourage weekly meetings between the departments involved in this, have measurements, short, medium, and long-term goals. How's the supply of this stuff coming into our state? What are we doing with the fentanyl? The demand, the drug courts, the prescription monitoring programs, all that stuff has to be put on the table, and everybody has to be part of that dialogue. So communication is very important to this.
The candidate before you said he wants to make Medicaid expansion permanent. Is that something you agree with? And if so, how do you make sure that if the federal government isn't there at the end of the day, when we have to start paying for more of it, that we can pay for it, and how?
We have to make it permanent. It's 2 years. We go through 2017. It's $800 million comes into our state that affects some 50,000 of New Hampshire people. Of course, we have to make it permanent. And our share of the cost will go down about 10% of the 100%. The federal government 90.
We're going to be paying more.
Well, over time.
Right.
Over time. And we will do. The economy's increasing. It's improving. And what I say to people is, if you take this away, what's the alternative? People are going to go to the emergency room for their treatment, and it will affect all of our health care costs. All the premiums will go up. So I think this is the most effective way to get the health care we need in our state. But to the point we just talked about, the opioid crisis, if we take these funds away, a lot of this money is going into addressing this really big problem in our state.
One criticism on the part of the Republicans last week when we had the update from James Vera, who we're going to hear from in just a few minutes, is that we're rushing the money out the door now. We're putting it out there too fast. Some might find that ironic since they're saying it came too slow to begin with. What's your take?
I don't think this is a political issue. We shouldn't be politicizing it at all. We identified the problems. There are contracts being reviewed. The money's going out in a way that should be. I think this is unfortunate. Some people want to politicize this issue. I don't agree with that.
Do you think it's just politics, or do you think that there is a need to show efficiency and quickness when it comes to this kind of thing, and maybe cut a couple of corners here and there, whether it's a contract here, a contract there, or whatever?
I'm not seeing that. I mean, it is a crisis, and we're responding, I think, in an appropriate way, and we need to step it up. I don't agree with that.
Economy. New Hampshire jobs numbers are pretty good. When you put forth your plan, what will you point to and say, this is what I'm going to do differently?
Well, what I've talked about in the campaign is, look, we are the live free or die state, right? We need to step up to the innovation state. So we have a 2.9% unemployment rate. That's good, but it also means we don't have enough educated workforce to meet the needs of this economy. So there's not one thing we're going to do like in a few months. It's over time. So getting the funding right for education, K through 12, university system, that kind of thing. Energy. A lot of business will tell me the energy costs in our state are way too high, and they're not. Some plants are now expanding in other states because they can't. They feel that energy costs are just not what they need to be in terms of, and also the educated workforce. So those two issues, what we really need to focus on, and then a transportation network. I tell people we rank 35th and 39th respectfully for road and bridge condition. We have some of the worst rural roads and bridges in America. You can't build an economy on that kind of dynamic. So all of those things are important, but everything I think extends from education. We have to get that right.
What about a rail project? Where are you on that?
I'm totally supportive of it. If we're going to have a 21st century economy, you look at Boston and what that represents in terms of it's an international city, and literally we're at the end of the line in terms of the rail system coming up to New Hampshire. Look at Nashua to Manchester, the airport. That area of the state is the most popular area of the country where there's any passenger rail. So linking Manchester to the mill yard to the airport to Boston, it makes sense, and we can do it. And the cost to do that is not prohibitive in my judgment.
Yeah, you said the number one priority job of the governor is to keep the citizens safe, and there are a lot of threats out there, perceived or real. I mean, whether we're talking about climate change, we're going through a drought. Let some people say that this is the most pressing issue. Gun violence, opioids, sanctuary cities. We're letting people in here who might do us harm. What do you think the number one priority is when it comes to the safety of New Hampshire?
Well, certainly climate change, and New England states and Mid-Atlantic states are addressing it through renewable programs that the federal government is not addressing it anyway. They don't even recognize we have climate change. Assault weapons. It's a big problem in our country. We've had more assault weapon violence in the last year than we've had in terms of deaths by military assault weapons than we have in the last 10 years. The frequency is just happening more and more. I'm the only candidate that said that we should address this issue.
At the state level?
At the state level. Many states have done it. I think we should do it. And if that means, taking on the NRA or any of the lobbyists who think that this is something that's acceptable to have military-style features, high magazine capacity weapons on our streets, no, it shouldn't be. Now, it has to be a New Hampshire solution. I mean, I'm talking about new guns being distributed. Yeah. And so, if Washington cannot act, look how long it took them to put a transportation plan together. Look in terms of. We can't even agree that we have climate change problems, and we have increasing sea level problems. So that if Washington won't do it, then we have to do it.
Let's talk about Washington and the top of the ticket and what it means to your race. How much do you think that Hillary Clinton's trust issues that we see in the polls related to her emails are affecting down ballot? And let's start with the same question that I asked you and I asked the governor. Do you believe Hillary Clinton, first of all, trustworthy enough to be president?
Yes, I do. And I think this is just part of the dynamic we go into this election cycle. I look at Hillary Clinton and her background and Donald Trump. In my opinion, there's no different. There's a clear difference between these two candidates. Hillary Clinton is certainly the most qualified person to be president, and so I don't accept that kind of electioneering kind of talk. And I think that the issues facing our country, in terms of her leadership, in terms of the leadership of the state, we need to elect Democrats, in my opinion. Because this party on the Republican side has become way too extreme. It's simplistic answers to complicated problems.
Which party has become way too extreme?
The Republican Party.
The Republican side, I gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, so we talk about the Democrats. Let's wrap it with this. Why are you the guy? Why are you the Van Osteren or Steve Marchand? Why are you the best choice?
I'm not a career politician. I'm not from Concord or the insider's choice. I'm 60 years old. I think I have the experience in the public and private sectors. I have legislative experience. I've led divisions of companies. I've led a department in state government. I took on, Wall Street, if you will, going against Tyco, Penachuk, ING, UBS, $50 million in fines. I stood up for New Hampshire. I've stood up for people I was a voice for the voiceless. That's the kind of leadership style I want to bring to Concord. And I've said, if elected, I'll go in, set a vision, execute that vision, and then go home. I'm not a career politician. I think the issues facing our state are consequential and dire, and I believe I have the best background and temperament and experience to do this.
And how much does your temperament and background play into what we're seeing now as far as the anti-establishment, anti-status quo movement? Because you are kind of a political outsider. 40 years since you were on a ballot.
You know, I think it's real. People are tired of the same old, going on and answers that really don't answer, that don't address the problems before us. I'm bringing a set of values and integrity and perspective about what we need to do in government. It's resonating. I think we are going to win. I think, it is an outsider's year. I think people are tired of politics it's just not working.
Sure.
The same old is not working for us.
There's a lot of frustration out there, no question about it. We'll see what it means on Election Day.
Okay.
Mr. Connolly, good to see
All
you.
right,
Best
good
of luck
to see you.
moving forward.
Thank you.
Have you back.